Okay, I'm going to introduce Gale from Nokia, who I thought was a friend of mine, until he starts impersonating me and nicking all my best quotes, allegedly.
Sorry.
Just winding up. So Gary's going to finish off, and I hope it's going to be sort of a summative presentation from Gary that brings a sort of a circular conclusion to what we've been talking about earlier on. So Gary, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Steve. And based on what you just said, I think I'll leave. So I think for me, deeply chuffed is the expression, not only to be here and for Steve to put so much faith in me to wrap this up, but also to have two separate people actually prove that the stuff which is normal meanderings on my blog, people actually read, which is really, really good. So anyway, I'm Gary. People ask me what I do, and I just say I'm from the internet. I'm a self-confessed map addict whose laptop is doing strange things. I've got a whole load of stuff on here about what I do and what I know, but we'll just ignore that. But during my day job, I work for Nokia in their location and commerce group, basically putting stuff on a map. And a lot of the talks that I do have an awfully large amount of web links in them. Sometimes I see people scribbling these web links down, and web links being web links, they're normally quite long and difficult and rambling. So if you decide that you see something that you might like to research later on, don't note any of those URLs down, put this one down. It's nice, it's short, it's very easy to scroll down. You've even got space on the back of your hand to fit it. If you go there now, why is my laptop doing this? If you go there now, it's just going to take you to my homepage, but tomorrow, by the time I get home and I've uploaded everything, that's where it will go. Anyway, it's also fair to say that this talk is a personal first for me. I get approached to do conferences, which is absolutely lovely, and the organisers typically want a title and an abstract about 3 months before I'm due to give the talk. The chances of the talk title being the same and even the talk being the same 3 months later are very, very rare. But in this case, it stayed the same and the abstract has stayed the same, and I have the email evidence to prove it. Okay, enough about me. Let's have some context first of all. Now, we live in this connected world of mobiles, laptops, the interwebs, and some of you probably know of this thing on the interwebs which is called Twitter, which has things called hashtags to identify common themes. And a particularly common theme at the moment seems to be people who like to take photos of their food and put them up on the internet, on Twitter or on Instagram. And they use the hashtag food porn. Well, I take photos of maps, and there's an awfully large amount of maps in this talk, so you could say this is pure and unadulterated map porn, and I make no excuse for it. But before I talk about today's maps, maybe Neocartography maps, I want to set a little bit of historical context. This is a map. It's one of the earliest maps that we know of, not the earliest, but it's one of the earliest recognizable maps. It's the world as the Babylonians knew it. So Babylon is there at the center of the map, and there's 7 triangular islands, 3 of which are missing because the tablet has been broken, and then you can see this circular thing which is called the River of Bitter Water, which they call the sea. It's art, to me. It represents the hopes and the inspirations for the unmapped areas of their world, and I think, considering this is 600 BC, it's a pretty good attempt at being authoritative, which is what a lot of people expect maps to be. So let's skip a few centuries and let's go to the golden age of exploration, where companies such as the Dutch East India Company were out exploring the areas of the world. And for those of you who remember Blackadder II, when Queenie hands Edmund Blackadder a map of the world which he's just about to explore, and it's a blank sheet of paper, and it says, just fill it in as you go along, please. This is the end result of that filling in of the blank areas. Now, it's more recognisably accurate for the world we know, but I think we'll all agree this is art as well as being a map. This art came as a price. You need to be very, very wealthy to commission such a map. And this map was often given as basically a backhander to the politicians and the sovereigns of the day who you, as a wealthy person, wanted to curry favour for. I think the same thing goes on today, only they call it political lobbying. But not only that, maps were also state secrets. Sharing a map was sharing power. A map said what belonged to you and what didn't belong to you. The entrepreneurs of this era were the great navigators, Columbus and Magellan. Their sponsors were kings and countries. This is a business plan. Make no mistake about it, it's not just a map. But a map doesn't necessarily have to be geographically accurate. They can show things like data, except it wasn't called data at the time. This is a map from 1869 by a chap called Charles Minard, who basically charted out Napoleon's march to Moscow. Now, keeping with cultural memes, if anybody has ever seen Eddie Izzard's Dress to Kill stage show in San Francisco, he does a very, very good impression of what happened to Napoleon. They went marching towards Moscow, holding their banners, got towards Moscow, oh, it's too cold, and then they went back. And that's exactly what's happening here. So the pinkish strip is the size of the army as they marched over time towards Moscow, and then the black strip is the retreat, because it was too damn cold. And as we can see, the number of people represented by the black strip here is a little bit smaller than the number of people represented by the pink strip. Now, another type of not necessarily geographically accurate map are the familiar mass transit and metro maps, and indeed it's this one here of the London Underground up on the top corner there, which I first found on the back of a London A to Z back in the days when we used to carry London A to Zs around with us rather than mobile phones with maps on them, was the first map I ever saw on this. That's what began my love affair with maps, and with transport maps in particular. So we all recognise these, we use most of these on a daily basis. There's also another map which will probably be a little bit more familiar to people of my generation, the Ordnance Survey map from the Pink Land Ranger series, which you can actually still find if you look online at certain zoom levels on streetmap.co.uk, although if you listen to Google, nobody uses that anymore and we all use Google Maps. But, no quick resume of mapping history in about 2 minutes will be complete without the maps that we do now tend to use online on an also daily basis. Now, because I work for Nokia, I have to put Nokia maps up, but actually I quite like this as a map. But it's not just Nokia doing it, it's Google, it's Bing, and it's OpenStreetMap. Now, all of these maps are pretty authoritative. They're geographically accurate. You can have a long and rambling discourse on whether each particular map style is cartographically pleasing or not, but from the maps of the 16th and 17th century to today's web and mobile maps, there seems to me to be something missing. Yeah, there's definitely brilliant cartography going on in these maps, these web maps I've just shown you. But the art seems to have gone missing somewhere along the lines. Or has it? So, this is where I live. This is Teddington. Just up there is Teddington Lock, where the infamous Monty Python fish slapping dance was filmed. There's Bushy Park, where a lot of the Olympic athletes trained. And this is, as has already been mentioned, this is the work of Stamen, the map design agency in San Francisco. It's as geographically accurate and authoritative as the other maps. They don't happen to be labels on it, but it's definitely still a map. And to my mind, this is most definitely art. It also happens to be my second most favourite map. So, how did we get to this? How did we go from cuneiform impressions on a baked mud tablet to a watercolour style map that don't quote me on this, if my darling wife would let me, I would blow up to as large as I possibly could and put it on the biggest wall in my house that I could. Well, I think the answer is data. And we have data these days. We have lots of data. We have shed loads of data. But to be more precise, we have easily accessible data. Either bulk downloads like you can get through OSM or through APIs. The data may be free and open, it may be licensed and proprietary, but we now have access to all of this data that previously was the preserve of the professionals. And I'm going back to the days where we had mainframe computers in air-conditioned computer rooms, tended to by men in white coats in air-conditioned environments. You know, people can now make maps, their own personal maps, in ways that they just couldn't have access to before. And they can do this because they want to. Just because they can. It's the mapping equivalent of climbing a mountain. Why do you climb a mountain? Well, you climb a mountain because it's there. So we can make maps, not only of what is, not only of what was, but we can also make maps of what might have been. Now this is a map of what Berlin would have looked like if Hitler's architect Albert Speer had got his way and if the events of 1945 turned out slightly differently than what you'll find in our history books. And I visit Berlin quite a lot because Nokia's mapping group is based there. And I find this map, when I'm walking around Berlin, absolutely fascinating because you can, and it cries out for an augmented reality app. You can stand just about here, Brandenburg Gate, or Brandenburger Tor as they call it, and you can look down the Unter den Linden towards Nordbahnhof up there, which is one of the main stations, which is where Nokia's office is. The Unter den Linden has vanished. There's something which looks like St. Paul's Cathedral on steroids, which apparently would have been so big it would have had its own climate inside it. And there's a great big lake. And also, a lot of where Tiergarten is, which comes kind of out here, would have been built over. It never existed. History changed, but this is the mapping that might have been. There's also the flip side to this. Just because we can make maps from all of this doesn't necessarily mean we should. This gem came from the Ottawa Sun in Canada, which manages to put Saudi Arabia in Africa, puts Iran on the Arabian Peninsula where Saudi Arabia should be, ignores the fact that the Sudan is now two countries and manages to get Malaysia and Indonesia mixed up. I'm surprised certain government embassies never lodged a formal complaint. A classic example of because you can make a map doesn't necessarily mean you should. And they published this in their newspaper as well, and people paid money for it. But the topic of bad maps is another topic entirely. So let's get back to some good maps. With access to data sets, you can start to do stuff which provides insights into maybe mapping the unmappable. So most of you here know London, and unlike in the United States or in Australia, we don't have formal definitions of London's neighbourhoods. When I used to work for Yahoo, we walked out onto Shaftesbury Avenue and we stopped 15 people at random and said, quick, what neighbourhood are you in? And we were in Soho, we were in Leicester Square, we were in Seven Dials, we were in Chinatown, we were in the West End, we were in Theatreland, all of which were right for them. And this is Tom Taylor's Boundaries website, which he took the Flickr alpha shapes, which is not necessarily a geographical boundary, but it's where people were saying photos on Flickr were of, and actually starts to create some neighbourhoods which kind of start to make sense. First time I saw this, I said, yes, that's how it is. Look, there's Soho. Soho is pretty much where I expect it to be. Hey, it's not 100% accurate, but sometimes having a map which is halfway there is better, to my mind, than having no map at all. And then there's this. So this is definitely something to be filed under the category of maps because you can. And at first sight, this looks quite like a normal map of the United States. You've got all the states there and these nice little lines joining the notional centroid of each state. Until you start to play with it in a web browser. And all of a sudden, you can see what would happen if you decided you really didn't want California or Florida or Texas to be where they currently reside. You can play with this for hours. I did when I really should have been finishing this talk. Yes, it's a map. Is this Neo? I don't know, but I think it's incredible what people can do with some data, some map shapes, and an awfully large amount of JavaScript know-how. And the more data that we get, the more people can and will make maps. So if you've ever had a yearning to find out where people have discovered fossils, there's a map to show you that. Now, you can argue this is nothing more than a classic Web 2.0 mashup, but give people a data set with spatial data embedded in it, they'll make a map out of it. And sometimes that's good enough. But sometimes people will go several steps beyond that, beyond a maps mashup, and they'll produce something which is only just recognizable as a map. I don't know if you can see, but there's actually a map down here. It's grey, it's very, very faint. It plays second fiddle to the data which is being represented on it, and it's called plume graph. Yeah, the map has been relegated to just this tiny piece of digital canvas. It's still a map, it's still accurate. And even if the data that's being visualized on top of it is part of humanity's less attractive side, I still think it's visually gorgeous. And it's still a map. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on. Okay. Now, a lot of people think, digital maps, this is new. But before we started making maps out of spatial data sets were being collected over a long period of time. Long before we had this convenient label which people are banging over now of big data, organisations like the NOAA were creating data sets you could make maps out of. We just didn't necessarily make the maps out of them until now. So you can have temporal as well as spatial maps. So we've got the tracks of US tornadoes over the last 55 or so years, and just from looking at that, I can tell where I would not want to live. You can also look at hurricanes over the last 160 years. Now this map actually is kind of quite a favourite of mine because it subverts the usual standard Mercator projection that we tend to see maps. Instead, it's looking from the bottom of the Earth up at Antarctica, and you can see the path, the circular path that these great storms are taking around our planet. All of these images, by the way, are up on Flickr, and if you really want to zoom in on them, they are absolutely gorgeous. Now, staying with the theme of wind for a minute, this map shows wind patterns across the United States. A lot of this stuff seems to go on in the US, which is why there's quite a US bias here, by the way. Well, not really real time. I mean, this was the state of the winds on August the 31st when I actually took this screenshot. Yeah, it's a nice example of data shown on a map. A visualization of wind patterns. You know, you've got a key down the side, you've got the data itself. Nothing particularly special apart from some clever visualizations until you actually see the real-time aspect. And then it comes alive. It moves, it almost breathes. And as with an awfully large amount of the data visualizations that you see today, it's very, very compelling and draws you in. Okay, so now to coin a Monty Python phrase again for something completely different. I mentioned a few minutes ago that we're really used to seeing maps in Gerardus Mercator's map projections. Normally the first maps we see probably on a wall at school, and if you're as old as I am, you remember that those maps had the British Empire in red, even though they were quite a few years out of date, or maybe you saw them in an atlas. Yeah, it's easy to forget that that's the way that maps tend to be projected since round about 1569 when Mercator first came up with his projection. But especially with a lot of the imagery that organisations like NASA is now pumping out of us. Yeah. We've all seen these wonderful pictures of our planet from space, and it doesn't really look like the maps that we see in 2D on a flat screen. Yeah, the map has been distorted to fit a projection on a typical Mercator map. Greenland is 60% bigger than it usually is, and the gigantic continent of Antarctica is just this white smear along the bottom of the map. But that doesn't matter because nobody lives there. So there's other map projections though, and this is one of my favourites. This is Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map. It makes a little bit more sense if you rotate it kind of through 90 degrees. And his idea on this was to have no projection distortion whatsoever. He wanted to show our planet as a single island in a massive ocean on what he notionally termed Spaceship Earth. What you would see if you were able to sort of unfold the planet and look at it from space. And he made a comment which I think was kind of quite nice and probably speaks to today's political situation more than anything. He said, "The maps we still use cause humanity to appear inherently disassociated, remote, self-interested, preoccupied with the political concept of it's got to be you or me. There's not enough room for both." It's still a map, but I love this. Okay, one more thing I want to show you here. What happens if you could put a boarding pass on a map and it would show you where your gate is at an airport? What about putting your mobile phone on the map and it would show you where you could charge your mobile phone? Or maybe you would put your credit card on the map and it would show you where you can go and get cash out of a hole in the wall, or maybe a bureau de change. This is MIT's TAPUMA, the Tangible Public Map, which is still a map, but it's not really a map that we're used to. It's something that you can physically interact, and it knows whether the stuff you put on top of it has any relevance to what is actually being shown. Yeah. More than today's touchpad things, more than today's laptops and tablets. Yeah, is this where maps are going to go? Maps that you can actually physically interact with? I don't know, but I thought it was kind of interesting because it subverts the notion of what we typically think is a map. Okay, so this is the part of the talk where it's traditional to start to wrap things up, maybe prognosticate a little bit on where maps are going to go from here, what's going to be happening in a year or so's time, and I'm sorry, I can't. Because a lot of the maps I've shown you only came out over the last 12 months. And if a year ago I would have said, well, there's this guy and he's going to get a map of the United States which you can pull apart and it's going to be attached by elastic, you would have probably laughed and said, cut down on the coffee. But that's what people are doing. People are making maps out of data and to show things which we don't even think of until you see it and you think, hey, that's really neat and really cool. And I think we've come full circle. We started off with maps as art, maps as things of power and things which people could look at for ages. We've gone through the formal, rigid, authoritative cartographical styles of maps, where if there wasn't a symbol within the key for what you wanted to show, it didn't go on there. And we're back to making maps which are beautiful and maps which are works of art. And the ability to do that is becoming more and more democratic, more and more easy. And with each passing month, there's more and more maps being made. Probably more maps now than I've ever known about in all the time I've been doing this. And as an example of the democratization of the map in action, I'll leave you with my personal favorite map. It's from Stamen again. It takes about 2 minutes to load because all of this is done in the browser. It's loading up, I think, about 6 or 7 different tile layers from various data sets. It's of London, if you didn't recognise that. You can just about make out the North Circular and the motorways. It's called Pretty Maps. It's definitely a map, and I think it's definitely pretty. Will this be my favourite map in a year's time? Only time, maps, and data will tell. So I hope you've enjoyed this map porn session as much as I've enjoyed researching it. All of those links and visualisations will be up on the web tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and thank you for not throwing anything.
Excellent, thank you very much, Gary. Does anyone want to ask any questions of Gary? We have some time for it, if you wish.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So you're from Nokia and you like the Tapu map. Is Nokia investigating these chemical technologies?
Nokia is investigating an awfully large amount of these sort of things, as are Google, as are Bing, as are pretty much anyone with some money in the coffers to fund an R&D organisation. As yet, I haven't seen anything coming out of our research centre, but there again, given the amount of papers that they file on almost a monthly basis, it's definitely possible that that could be. Okay, in that case, I want to make one point, which I've observed through the sessions which I've been seeing here. One of the things which has impressed me the most over the last couple of years, with OpenStreetMap in particular, and I mentioned this to Andy over coffee, is the fact that I don't think the OSM community makes enough of a song and dance over. And that's the fact that with a lot of today's web maps, it's kind of like buying a brand of coffee or of baked beans. You know, here's a tin of baked beans and you know exactly what you're going to get. That is the style of tomato sauce we put on the beans. This is the sort of beans we have. If you want something different, well, I'm sorry, you can't have it because this is a can of baked beans. But with OSM, just from the maps I showed you there, the number of styles, the number of ways we can look at this data is really limited only by the imagination of the people who are doing this. And especially with a lot of the Stamen designs, they definitely to be filed under, we did it because we can. But I don't think OSM makes enough of a song and dance over that. Yes, you've got brilliant user engagement. Yes, they're mapping the world as that real-time visualization showed earlier. But to make maps which don't have a company's brand name stamped all over them, I think is a real selling point. And I know that when I'm not in my day job, it gives me more power and more flexibility in the coding and stuff that I do than any commercial map does.
Well, you have another question, Graham?
Very quick.
Yeah?
I'm reminded of the quote, I don't know who said it, but it's banded around where I work. If it can be measured, it can be managed, and everything can be measured. And I wonder whether some of the things I'm interested in seeing, mapped, if you like, visualizations of, is the things that maybe can't be so easily recorded, or, I don't know, I mean, you know, the psychogeography of it, really. There's another website, I think it's called something like We Feel Fine, where it takes all the feeds from Twitter things and looks at where people are spatially and how they're feeling, and it kind of maps the emotions. But you know, you're looking for people using words happy, sad, which is very crude and very basic. Mm-hmm. And it still feels like we can look at sort of, you know, where the grass is greenest, or where people say they're feeling happy. But I don't know to what extent that's kind of accurate or real or useful, because I'm still seeing, you know, the map of the wind, there's no actual wind there, I don't feel cold, I don't move over, it's, you know. So are we still dealing with data that can be kind of dataized, and you know, how close are we, I guess is the question, to being able to map things at the moment we can't store on a computer, or subjective?
Yeah, I mean, utterly subjective, but there again, that's what half of this is. You know, it comes back down to the subversive qualities that a lot of this has, where you know, people who produce maps are sometimes convinced that theirs is the one true map, and there is no one true map. Your definition of what a place is, of what a map should look like, is going to be totally different to mine, and we're both right. But to talk to what you were saying, did anybody see the Twitter lighting up of the London Eye during the Olympics, where the colour and intensity of the lighting on the eye was based on one of the Olympic hashtags, and whether people were using positive or negative language. Now, that wasn't just basic keyword matching. They actually had some quite clever semantic analysis and natural language processing. Admittedly, it was London 2012, so it only worked in English. So if there was somebody expressing great joy in French, they wouldn't have got their particular tweet to cause the eye to light up. But the more we go into almost the commoditization of stuff which was previously the preserve of computer scientists, the more open web APIs that we start to get opened up, which are now able to start doing stuff like here's a text string, analyze it and tell me Wolfram Alpha style what you think is going on this. Is there geographical reference? Is there emotional reference? Then I think the closer we're going to get to start to sort of really merge cartography, neocartography, psychogeography and neogeography. And let's bear in mind, at the end of the day, in 10 years' time, none of this is going to matter, because it's not going to be neo anymore, because it will probably either have fallen by the wayside or it will become part of the establishment.
Could I just make a parallel comment? You gave a reference, I think, to Nold. I'm not sure if it's the same Nold as I know, but Christian Nold did the work on emotional mapping, and in that case there is no accuracy, there is no right or wrong. It's just measuring individuals' perceptual thoughts and feelings, and kind of, there is no right and accurate thing in that sense.
So there's some maps you can't produce then, and maybe they're the most important or the most useful.
Or maybe you can, you just happen to make that map for yourself and yourself only.